And I've already done this one in the past, but it's a good one to kind of revisit every spring because there's always new folks that are jumping on here. And this is kind of a good way to give yourself a refresher course if you're trying to maybe just move to a new home. Maybe your old vegetable garden maybe got shaded out, so you have to put a new one in. So this will just give you the logical steps. All right. So if you are a gardener, which I'm going to assume you are because you're on this webinar, then you already know gardening is cheaper than therapy. Now, you may have other things besides tomatoes, but getting out in the yard and just getting your fingers in the dirt, being able to harvest something that you have grown, those are just it's the best feeling. You feel kind of self-sufficient. If you've had a hard day, it's a good way for you to just kind of get that therapy, that horticultural therapy. And that is a thing. There are specializations in that, but just getting out there and being one with nature. So first of all, you need to kind of decide on what the best type of garden is going to be for you. Last week, I did a program on no-till gardening, and that had a lot more to do with raised bed gardening, straw bale gardening, lasagna gardening, a bunch of different stuff that isn't necessarily in ground gardening. But this week, we're going to be talking about just gardening in general. So that kind of gets thrown back into the mix. And some people do like to in-ground garden. Maybe you have a really large property and you've got an acre that you could devote to a vegetable garden. Maybe you can plant some blueberries and some other things. So that gets thrown back in here. So this, we'll talk a little bit about that. And we can see what kind of steps there are as to how you would start that. But it's also going to include raised beds. And that can take the form of all sorts of different things. You see, we've got some cedar beds over there on the top left, but it could be metal. It can be like a hardy plank type material or plastic. There's all sorts of different types of raised beds. The only thing that we kind of caution you against using material wise would be treated lumber. We really don't think you should use treated lumber that can leach into the soil and therefore the vegetables that you eat. So try to kind of let that not be a choice that you're going to do. Square foot gardening, very good for limited space. Maybe you're in a community garden and you've leased a 4x8 bed, so you don't have a lot of space, but you really have a desire to grow a lot of different things. So square foot gardening might be for you, or just container gardening. You might live in a condo. You might only be in a townhouse with a tiny little spot out your back door for a patio. Maybe, you just don't have, maybe got an HOA that's kind of cranky and doesn't want you to break ground in the backyard. So container gardening might be for you. And then straw bale gardening. There, like I mentioned, there are a lot of other types, but for practical purposes, that no-till that I did last week, we're going to kind of throw those into raised bed gardening and kind of like maybe straw bale and other types. And then, of course, the straw bale. That one is great because you can do it right on top of pavement. It's going to give you a buffer between that hot concrete and the plants that you're trying to grow. And then when you're done, if you have to move, you can just scrape it all up and compost it and you're done. Okay, so location. This is really important. So if you are looking at having a summer garden, you're going to need at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight a day. Most of the plants that you're going to have growing in the summertime are going to be heavy feeders. They need a lot of attention. They need fertilizer, they need water, and they need a lot of sun. And they need that intensity of the sunlight. They're going to be very productive, like a tomato. They're going to give you a lot of fruit, but they need that extra oomph of having 6 to 8 hours of sunlight. So if you don't have that much, you might need to think about a different location for where you're going to put that garden. Now, true, in the winter time, those gardens don't need quite as much sunlight. So maybe you only want to do winter gardening. And if that's the case, you can probably err more towards that 6 hours. Water availability, very important, especially if you're in Georgia or anywhere in the Southeast. You know it can get really hot and alternately dry, wet, pretty much all through the summer. That's how we typically get our rain. from pop-up thunderstorms. So you need to have that water availability very close by. If you have to haul a hose all the way from the house down to your garden for almost an acre, that's me. I didn't plan very well long ago. It's going to get really old really fast. So thankfully, I do have a wooded section and I just leave a hose there all year round. So I just connect on one end and connect on the other, and then I'm good to go. But if you can pull water permanently through PEX pipe or, uh, you know, PVC pipe or something like that down to where your garden is and have a nice little faucet right there. So all you have to maybe do is connect up at the house or just turn the spigot. You will really thank yourself for doing that. Also consider slopes. Erosion can be a problem. Now, I talked last week about having raised bed gardens on a slope, and those are more permanent, but they can really turn a really hilly and crazy backyard into something that's very usable. So don't discount it if you have a really steep backyard. It just requires some planning, and we can always kind of, be your sounding board for that and give you some suggestions. But yeah, it is totally doable. Microclimates. So maybe you're at the bottom of a fairly tall hill. Maybe you have some walls or fence, something that you want to maybe block the wind from. Maybe you're in that low spot, so it might be colder there in the morning. Those are all things to think about. So if you have an option to not put it in the absolute lowest part of your yard, that's probably a good thing, especially if where your house and property is located is fairly down on a hill. Now, if you're on a balcony or something else like that, don't worry so much about that. You're going to be up or, unless you're really down near a pond or something else, but you do want to kind of be aware of that. So sometimes you have a southern exposure. It's super hot if you're on a patio or if your house and your backyard faces that way. Be aware of that and that your evaporation rate might be higher. There's a lot of different things climate-wise that you kind of need to take into account. Is it going to stop you from putting a garden in? No, but it might mean you have to water a little extra. It may mean that you want to go in and put some shrubs around an area, or plant a tree kind of far away so that it kind of blocks a little bit of the sun. There's some different things to take into consideration there. Okay, preparing your garden. So there are some things that we're always going to recommend. And if you're doing specifically an in-ground garden, you probably want to do a soil test. We do them super cheap here in Gwinnett. It's just an S1 soil test. It's for fertility purposes. It'll look at your pH and nutrients, $8. Best $8 you ever spent. So if you're going to do multiples of those, again, best $8 you'll ever spend. So you can get those tests from the store, but the one that we do is going to be a lot more accurate and give you a way better representation. Plus, the lab will come back with recommendations for you on your fertilization and also what you need to do, what you need to add lime-wise for your pH. And it's going to be very specific to your particular plants, vegetables, fruits, ornamentals, that kind of thing. You need to decide on conventional or organic gardening. So some people are going to say, oh, it's organic, no brainer there. But organic's difficult. So make sure that you're kind of taking that into account. I have several videos that are up on our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, and those will walk you through organics in pesticide management and also in fertilization and how to recognize when you have a nutrient deficiency. That happens a lot. So you need to be aware of what you need to do in order to treat it. If you just go conventional or synthetic types of fertilizer and pesticides and stuff, you can use integrated pest management. I'll go into that a little bit, but you're using a more complete fertilizer at that case, although the organic industry is getting better about putting it all in one bag and making it easier. You also need to know about that first and last frost date. We did last year move to zone 8A here in Gwinnett County. So that is something that not too much difference, but now it's about April 9th instead of April 19th. So 10 days, but always just watch the weather forecast. So that's tomorrow. I did look ahead to see if we had any frosts in the forecast. This week is a little chilly, but now they're not predicting anything in the low 30s, although they did say there might be a low frost or a light frost in some areas. No hard freeze, so that's a good thing. Just know that the colder it is, it slows the process of growing down. So putting seeds in the ground or putting transplants in there, you're not really going to do a whole lot. So you're not going to gain a whole bunch by putting them in early, especially if you've got cold weather. Sometimes it's better to just wait. You might not kind of want to know what soil type you have. And while our soil test tells you the fertility of it, it's not going to tell you the soil types. So you can do that super easy. You see the little infographic on the left. Just get yourself a clear jar, a pickle jar, a canning jar, something like that. Fill it about halfway with the soil that's in your yard where you want to put that garden, and then you're going to fill the remaining half with water and basically put that lid on there and just shake it up. And then you're going to let it set aside overnight, and you're going to come back and you're going to look and see down at the bottom there, you see, what does it look like? How much sand do you have in there? How much silt? How much clay? That's going to help you determine how much you need to amend that soil. So you can always put in mulch to kind of get that organic layer up a little bit more. Ideally, at least for me, it's going to be about a 33% mix. So 33% sand, 33% silt, and 33% clay. Clay helps keep water in. It's got very small particles. So, sand helps with allowing uh, rain to kind of flow through. And that organic matter, that silt, is going to help root systems be able to kind of grow through that and be able to kind of not have that hard pan clay that happens in late summer. Uh, if you look at some of the scientific studies, they say it may need to go a little bit higher proportional wise than some of the other stuff. But for me personally, I found that about a 33% mix of each of those, so just equal portions, is great. Infrastructure. So a shed, if you don't have a garage or a back porch where you can put a small cabinet or something, but someplace to store your equipment, that's a good thing. Fencing to keep out wildlife. We have varying levels of problems of that. Sometimes if you have it out back, you might have deer, you could have raccoons, you could have squirrels. There's all sorts of different things. As we become more urbanized, deer are going to become a bigger problem. So you may need to have a higher fence. You may need to add a hot wire to your fence. You can also go for trellises or stakes or other supports for vining things if you have a lot of space. You can get a little bit freer if you have a more condensed space. Going vertical sometimes helps because you can get some of those vining crops to grow up on, you've got some cattle panel there to grow up, and you can then put more stuff beneath it. Identify supplies. So you need some kind of compost or other organic matter for the soil. So there's a lot of ways to source that. Of course, you can just go down to the big box stores. Apparently, the Big Orange store has some stuff on sale for $2.50 a bag in the immediate future. But you can also source free stuff. Mulch, City of Lawrenceville, if you live near in Gwinnett County, Fridays from 8 to 3, they offer free mulch. You can just come fill up your trunk or fill up the back of your pickup truck. DeKalb County also has that down by the extension office. At least they used to offer that. Chip Drop, chipdrop.com will bring you a dump truck load full. Mostly it's going to be wood chips, but you can compost those yourself. And then, of course, you can go buy it. You can buy Black Cow. That's a really excellent compost. You can check out some of the neighboring farms if you want to do that. Just be very wary because a lot of the pesticides, herbicides, things like that may carry over in the manure. So you might want to make sure that you let that continue to compost on your own property for several years after you pick that up. Also consider equipment and tools. So a wheelbarrow, you probably need something like that. Shovel, garden fork, hose, trowels, hand tools, things like that. If you want to start your own seeds, get some grow lights, super cheap. Amazon had them on sale, the little clip-on kind for $7.50. So again, super cheap. They're very reasonable these days. Pruners, thinning scissors, stuff like that. String and twine, sometimes the little green floral tape for tying stuff up, binding things, stakes, wooden stakes, stuff like that. You want to make sure that you have a good mix of all of those garden tools. Additional supplies. So here we go back to, are you going to go organic or are you going to go synthetic? So organic fertilizers, if you're going to do organic, nitrogen, that's going to be alfalfa meal, fish meal, blood meal. And again, I do have a really comprehensive program that I did last year on treating organic nutrient deficiencies. And it goes much more in depth into what you need, how to identify that and everything. And you can check that out at the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel. I'll have a link at the end. Phosphorus, bone meal, rock phosphate. So I put what the element is and phosphorus, P, K for potassium here in parentheses. Don't forget that if you're going to do that, that you've got to do a little chemistry. So there, a lot of these are going to be compounds. This is just the element here. But when you start into the world of organics, you're going to have to start looking a little bit harder at what are the chemical compounds that are in there. Does it have calcium? Does it have phosphorus? Is it in a usable format? That kind of stuff. So this right here is just a broad overview. So it's not as simple as this. It gets a little bit more in depth. But for practical purposes, this is all you really need right now, since this is just an overview. For potassium, green sand, wood ash, but don't go crazy on that wood ash because you can change your pH. Gypsum and kelp eel, those are all things that you can get potassium for. And as I mentioned before, the organics industry has figured out that it's hard for a lot of people to know what individually they need to put on their plants. So they've gotten better at putting all of those in one bag and calling it a complete fertilizer. Thank goodness, because you'd have to go out and spend a small fortune on all those different types of fertilizers. Where if you chose synthetic, they would put them all in one bag, including your little micronutrients, and it was a lot cheaper. So that's good that they've figured that out. And then, of course, pH adjusters. So if you get that soil test and it comes back and tells you that your pH is a little too acidic, we'll talk about that in a bit. Then you can look for garden lime, and you can, of course, use wood ashes to increase your pH if you need to, and organic matter. So you'll also need to look at pest control materials. So you're going to have pests. They're just here and they're waiting for your garden. They're just as hungry for what you're growing as you are. So you're going to have horticultural oil, insecticidal soap, neem oil, pyrethrins, and maybe some pheromone sticky water traps. That's for organic pest control materials. So if you're going synthetic, you have a little bit more variation in what you can use. Even going synthetic, like for instance, I try to do as much integrated pest management, meaning go out there and squish eggs, squish nymphs. I might use horticultural oil or insecticidal soap when they're itty bitty, so they're easier to kill. But then if I need to, I do incorporate synthetic chemicals into my gardening regime. So for me, I adhere more to the integrated pest management model, which does allow for all of that. I do try to use as much organics as I can, but I'm okay with using synthetic pesticides if needed. And then irrigation equipment, of course, you want to have a good quality hose, a good quality spray head, and a water can if you need that. Then a drip hose, maybe a timer, so that you can make sure that you're not overhead sprinkling and causing additional disease issues. But that timer is very useful if you're busy. It's really wonderful if you have the time to go out there and stand in water, but a lot of us don't. So you have to have that timer so that you can make sure your plants get the water that they need. All right, choosing seeds and transplants. So you're going to have to choose those plants appropriate to the season. And if you're a newbie, that is perfectly fine. We've got you. I have another slide here that has a planting chart and other sources for where you can find all of that that'll just walk you through and tell you exactly what season you need to plant what. So plants appropriate for the season, cool season crops for spring and fall. That's going to be your leafy greens, your brassicas like your broccolis and Brussels sprouts and things like that. Carrots and peas, snap peas, sugar snap peas, that kind of stuff. Beets, potatoes, some potatoes, and then did I already have? Yeah, well, leafy greens, that'd be lettuces and collard greens and things like that. A lot of those have in their the cellular structure are able to tolerate more cold. So they do better in cool seasons and they don't do as well in warm seasons. If you've tried or have seen what happens, they bolt. Every plant wants to complete its life cycle. And that means that they grow, they produce fruit, they flower, and then they die after they're fertilized. So your job as a gardener is to slow that process down because you want as much fruit or vegetable as you can get. So warm season crops for summer. Remember, these are going to be heavier feeders. They need more intense sunlight, but they're going to produce a lot more. So tomatoes, green peppers or hot peppers, okra, loves heat, eggplants, sweet potatoes, lots of vines there, all sorts of different types of beans, pole beans, bush beans, all sorts of stuff like that, corn, and other various herbs and things like that that are annuals. So my recommendation to you is try to select varieties, for instance, tomatoes that are disease resistant. Why do I say that? It's very humid here. We get a lot of rain and fungal growth, bacterial growth, uh, a lot of times you get that super humid air and then you get a proliferation of blights. You might get some bacterial overgrowth in the soil and you get some type of wilt in your tomatoes. So if you can choose varieties of tomatoes that are resistant to those, fusarium wilt, verticillium wilt, nematodes, those little wormy buggers that are in the soil, and alternaria blight, if you can manage to get seeds and grow those out yourself or find a source. I know our Snellville greenhouse, we've got master gardeners over there. They often are at the Snellville Farmers Market. They sell a lot of vegetable plants and they do sell some of those that are resistant. Also at the Master Gardener plant sale, our Master Gardeners have, that's April 26th at the Lilburn Library. They'll be selling a lot of vegetable plants and there are some that are available there as well. So also you need to be familiar with the perfect germination temperature for whatever it is you're trying to grow, days to maturity, so you know when you can harvest. Whether your tomato is a determinate or indeterminate. Determinate simply means that all the fruit comes available at one time. Roma tomatoes are an example of that. Indeterminate, that means that you're going to get a few here and a few there, and they're going to produce all summer long. So beefsteak tomatoes would be an example of that. Susceptibility to frost. I mentioned that brassicas and like cabbages and stuff like that tend to be a little tougher versus tomatoes, which they're not going to be around. They're going to be unalived if we get a frost. So you need to know which is what. Now, this is the slide. I love this slide. So I do try to provide resources with a QR code. Like I said, I do record, so you could always check this out later. It'll be up on that Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel. But these are both, you see the seed packet there. That gives you everything that you need to know. It tells you what it is. It tells you how to start it, when to start it. It tells you how many days till harvest, how much sun it needs. It gives you all the instructions, and then it'll also have the pack and sell by dates on there so that you can tell if it's an older seed or not. Now, if it's more than 1 year old, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad seed. You can always do something called a little germination test. I'm not sure if I have that in here or not. I'll go ahead and tell you if I do, then yeah, I'll bring it back up again. But you just take 10 seeds, you get a wet paper towel, you put those 10 seeds in there and line them up, five, however you want to do it. and then put it in a wet baggie or a Ziploc baggie, and then put it somewhere in indirect sunlight. Let it sit there about a week, go back, open it up, look at it. How many of those seeds actually germinated? If you have 8 out of 10, that's an 80% germination rate. That's pretty good. And you can go ahead and still plant those. And you can do that test when it's still too cold outside to do anything. So if you've got some seed from years past that you never used, go ahead and check it out and see how did it germinate. If it's like 40 or 50%, you probably need to go ahead and get some new seed. But if it's, 60, 70, 80%, that's pretty good. You can probably just put a little extra out there. Um, the vegetable planting chart, that was what I was talking about. This one lists all the different vegetables. It'll talk about days to maturity, the cultivars that do best here, whether it's a spring or a fall crop. You can see how close together you need to put them, all the pertinent information, all right there. And it's a really pretty, colorful chart. They redid that several years ago. You can get that with that QR code that you see there. And then over on the left, you see this colorful Georgia map. The College of Environmental or Ag and Environmental Sciences has the UGA Weather Network, and that, with that QR code, will take you to that website. You can look at soil temperature. You can look at humidity levels. You can look at all sorts of great weather information that will help you plan when you're actually going to grow your stuff, whether it be a lawn or ornamentals, when you're going to put stuff in the ground, anything. It looks at soil moisture. And that can tell you whether we're having a drought. All of that stuff, very good information, and that's all available at your fingertips right there. So go to that one and bookmark it. It's a good one to have. So next up, draw yourself a diagram of your garden. So we may not have a ton of room, and that's perfectly okay. Remember, you can still do gardening by the square foot if you don't have much space. But if you do have a little bit of space, you can draw something out like this. This one would be for like a 4x8 raised bed. So really, that's a lot of stuff in there. And this is taking into account what will grow together, what probably shouldn't grow together, and maximizing space. So you've got your tomato plant next to your bush cucumbers. So again, both compact, both bush size, so they're not going to get too big. You've got potatoes over on one quadrant, onions, and then some type of pepper there next to your cucumbers and your onions. So you've got a lot of stuff crammed in there. And that's okay as long as, one, you have airflow, two, you kind of mind some of the rules about what stuff you can grow together, and three, that it's not going to trail out of your bed into your neighbor's bed, because like I mentioned, this would be suitable, a planting plan suitable for like a community garden or something like that. If it's in your own yard, do whatever you want. You can put all your cucumbers everywhere and they can trail everywhere. But this is a good plan for someone who has a limited amount of space. So you want to make sure the arrangement, the spacing of the plants, seeds or transplants, you kind of mentioned that. The date that you're going to put all that stuff in. So make sure you've got all warm season or all cool season, and note the end of harvest. So you can do some overlapping. For instance, let's say you've got onions, or you've got some types of greens and they're not quite bolted yet. Well, you can hold off on doing your cucumbers or your tomatoes, allow them to kind of continue to grow, or you can plant them. And as your tomatoes get bigger, your lettuces will start to bolt, and then you can just take them out later. So next, you want to kind of decide, should I start my seeds indoors? And some people get really intimidated. I have another presentation where we go really in depth into how to do seeds, how to start those inside. And again, you can get a lot of those supplies, your LED grow lights, your little seed trays. You can get all that really cheap these days. So, there's no reason you need to go put hundreds of dollars into all of the supplies when you can buy just a drop grow light off eBay or Amazon or, one of the other sites for like less than 20 bucks. And then you can get some of these little trays seed starting soil at Walmart for, less than $10. And you can pick your own seeds, which is always fun. And if you have issues with disease, and I'm just going to use tomatoes as an example, like my garden, you can choose those disease resistant varieties, grow those up, and then you don't have to worry about sourcing them in other places. But you do have specific conditions. So water, you need to make sure that you keep that stuff moist. And then proper temperature, 40, it's going to vary a little bit, but 40 to 70 degrees. You can get seed warming mats. Those are going to be probably right about 70 degrees. You need to make sure that the soil that you use, it's fairly loose. You don't want it too waterlogged. So don't keep them completely saturated. Then you'll have problems with, once they do germinate, you'll have problems with damping off, which is a fungal infection. Those seeds will then flop over the stem of the seed, and then it'll just die. So you don't want to do that. And then you need to kind of think about what you're growing. So light, dark, either, that kind of stuff. Some seeds are going to need more light, so they need to be on the top of the surface. Some things need to be covered. So tomatoes, peppers, squash, and you can either put them a little bit beneath the surface of the soil, or you can just cover it. But ultimately, if you're going to do any type of growing of seeds inside, you need to start them up probably 6 to 10 weeks. I would say closer to 10 weeks, especially if you want good sized plants, or maybe even 12 weeks for like tomatoes and peppers. Tomatoes, we get really hot here in the summer, and a lot of times our tomatoes just kind of go into the suspended animation. They don't like growing in 90-degree plus weather. They're happiest between 70 to 90. So if you have an indeterminate variety, that's one that produces a little bit all summer long, it's just going to stop producing. You're not going to see many flowers if it's hot. The fruits that are on the vine will continue to mature, but you're just not going to get any new flowers until it cools off a little bit. So, the earlier you can get them into the ground, the bigger they are, the more fruit you will get, because then you don't have to worry as much about fungal issues, bacterial issues, all of that stuff that happens in July and August that a lot of times will kill off a tomato crop. So planting seeds and transplants into the soil. So in the spring, you want to kind of spread a little bit of that compost on there. That's a good organic matter. It'll have some nutrients in there for them. Don't dig it in too deep, but just kind of scratch it in. So that will work its way into the soil column over time, but you don't need to really disturb the soil biome too much. Consider in fall when planting gardens, that's going to be shorter days. So obviously we go from, up to 12 hours of sunlight, 10 hours, whatever, down to, maybe 6 hours. And it's going to take a longer time for the stuff that you're planting to mature, up to 2 weeks. So keep that in mind. Some people get really excited and they're like, oh, I'm excited. I'm going to get fresh lettuce, or I'm going to get cabbages, or whatever it is. But it takes a little bit longer because we don't have as much sunlight and it's not as intense. Hardening off plants, very important in the spring. If you bought them from a nursery and they're outside, they probably have already gone through that process. So less to worry about, unless you're purchasing tender plants in the spring and we're due for a cold snap, which has happened the last several springs. So if the weather person says that it's supposed to drop below 32 or close to 32, consider bringing them into your garage, or covering them if they're laying on your deck or something like that to help protect them. But if you get them from a greenhouse, or you bring them from in your house, you started seeds, hardening off means that you need to take them out for a few days, or sorry, for a few hours every day for maybe a week or so to get them used to the colder temperatures out there. If you have a plant that's not hardened off versus one that is, that plant that isn't hardened off, if you have a really light frost, you're going to get freeze damage on it. Whereas the one that had been hardened off, and was used to those fluctuating temperatures, maybe wouldn't have any damage to it. So it does make a big difference. Um, we get calls every year. I get pictures every year from people that have this kind of it looks like a paper bag, which is damage, freeze damage on some of their little plants that they bought at a greenhouse or wherever, and they left them outside and it got too cold. And sometimes it kills the plant outright. Other times there may just be spots on the leaves. They'll grow out of it if you see that. But just note that if you cover them up or bring them in the garage, you can skip that. Still hardening is a good idea. Got to do that, but you can skip the damage. So you're going to place those transplants in a hole, fill about halfway with soil, water, and then kind of firm the soil around them. Water every couple days until you get those new leaves. Remember, in the spring, it's nice and it might be warm, but not too warm. It's really conducive to growing your vegetable plants. Same thing in the fall with ornamentals and other stuff. But we might have some hot weather, so be prepared for that, especially in the first, 2 to 4 weeks after you first put them in the soil. You need to make sure you baby them. They got to have that water if it's dry because they're gonna evapotranspirate and that water leaves. They haven't established a root system yet. So you've got to make sure you baby them. And then lastly, always, always mulch. So you want to mulch your plants in the garden because that helps with the evaporation. If you get a nice rain, you want to keep that moisture in the soil. You don't want that to go evaporate away. So that keeps that moisture down there for your plants. So you can put wheat straw, you can put pine straw, you can put wood chips. Don't dig those into the soil, but you can put all of that on there to form a barrier. Some people will put like a porous um, landscape fabric. Sometimes you'll use newspaper if you have that. I've seen people use cardboard boxes. Just beware that you probably don't want to put those immediately around the plant because it can take a lot for rain to get down there and it could get drier than you think. But just having something to cut down on the weeds and something to help the evaporation rate minimize that is a good thing. So garden maintenance schedule, you want to plan a daily, weekly, and monthly schedule. So if you're in a community garden, you may already have this. It's probably hanging on a clipboard in a shed someplace. So familiarize yourself with that. If you don't, and maybe you've got a couple people in the house, then this would be a good way for you to work out who waters, who weeds, that kind of stuff. Maybe in your community garden, they don't have something like this. Find a couple buddies who have beds there with you and are willing to work out a schedule for you. That way, if you go on vacation, you've got somebody to take care of your stuff. There's nothing worse than working so hard to get all of your stuff in the ground, babying it, fertilizing it, watering it, and then watching it die because you had a dry spell when you were on vacation someplace and came back and all your stuff is dead. So this way you can have someone to take over and help you out if you need to. Smart planting in the garden. So there's different ways, and I'll have a presentation on, I think it's companion planting coming up pretty soon. It's another new one. But there's different things that you can do, plants that you can plant next to each other. So like companion planting, you can put nasturtiums nearby. That'll attract beneficial insects. It might repel some pests, and one plant can support another. Um, that also could be legumes and heavy feeders like corn next to each other. One is a nitrogen fixer and the other one uses it. Trap planting, you can use sunflowers on one side of your garden and your tomatoes on another. Leaf-footed bugs are a big problem. They love sunflowers and they'll flock to them, so you won't have as many on your tomatoes. You can interplant crops, so this can help confuse pests. You can pair crops, some that have shallow roots, some that have deeper ones, some that mature really fast, some that take a while, some shorter, some taller. And then think about mycorrhizal fungi. This is in a lot of stuff actually. So if you buy those big bags of soil 3, that's in there. But you can actually buy this off Amazon and just add it in yourself if you're doing like lasagna gardening, or if you just have an in-ground garden and you want to make sure It may already be there, but you can make sure. So here you're going to practice no-till, not use a lot of pesticides, um, and add in those fertilizers because that you don't want to disrupt or destroy that soil biome. You're trying to make that better because if you have a good soil, then you have better plants. And last, plant pollinator plants because you want those vegetables. If you don't have pollinators attracted to your vegetable plants, you're not going to have vegetables. So not only are flowers really pretty to look at, but they can also function as an attractant to bring those bugs in. All right, techniques to benefit. Keep that organic matter up in your soil. Organic matter breaks down in UV radiation. So that's why it's always good to add something every year. And you can do your own compost or you can go buy it, whichever, I'm not picky, but you can also do your own. So you don't want to leave bare soil. You want that organic matter to hold that moisture in. So uh, you can either layer it on the top. Sometimes people will there's a lot of different ways to compost. If you have a raised bed, you can, dig a trench and you can put compost in there. That'll break down pretty quickly. You can put leaves over the top. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can put over the top. So you could put last year's leaves over the top as a mulch. You can put pine straw. You can put wheat straw. You can use chips that they've dropped. You can take chop and drop lawn trimmings and plants. Don't dig it into the soil, but you can lay it over the top. It dries out pretty quick. And composted manure. Here, I do need to make mention, you need to know what kind of pesticides they used either on the animal or herbicides they used in the pasture the animal was feeding off of. There are some bad ones. The main one I want to mention is Grazon. It's been in use now long enough. Most people are aware that it does have some very detrimental effects on tomatoes, the Solanaceae family. So tomatoes and peppers and eggplants. It's a growth regulator. And so you might dig that into your garden, plant your little plants. 2 months later, they're all curling and sad looking, and that's because it's a growth regulator and they're very sensitive to it. So just make sure you know where your composted manure is coming from. And if you're not sure, leave it off to the side and let it compost for another year or two before you add it into your own garden. Mulch all crops. I can't express that enough. Conserves moisture, so you don't have to water as much. It's going to help with weeds. It's going to help with erosion because we do have hills, and it's going to add in nutrients as it breaks down. So all good things. Avoid compaction. So if you're in a raised bed, you probably don't have to worry about it too much or any type of container gardening. If you're lasagna gardening, which just basically means layering composts and gardening above the ground, probably not an issue. But you don't want to use heavy equipment through your garden. You want to make sure you have designated walking paths. If you can use those raised beds, do that and consider no-till. And again, I said I had a presentation last week on no-till. That should be up, fairly soon. I want to get an opportunity to edit it. Do a walkthrough. This falls under integrated pest management. So you want to identify the good bugs and the bad bugs. Look for holes in leaves, chew marks, things like that. Look for eggs. So you're going to flip those leaves over. There's a good example of, looks like a squash leaf. Those little kind of gold colored, maroon colored eggs. Not something you want there. Squish them, get rid of them. Recognize the adults. Recognize the nymphs, which are the immature version of the adult pest. Caterpillars, recognize those. And any worms. Learn the pests in your garden so you know what each life stage looks like. And just walk through and kind of look because it may be, you're going to go out of town and you've been doing a pretty good job. And by the time you get back, you got some of these little eggs here. If you get them off as their eggs, you don't have to worry about them as nymphs or adults because they'll do damage. And then you end up with a squash plant like the one below where you've got vine borers. So all of that work and then you lose it. Is the plant wilting? Well, it could be a vine borer. It could be that it needs water. It also could be it's overwatered and it's got root rot. So Try to familiarize yourself with the weather conditions, what you've been dealing with, pests, that kind of stuff. It'll help you diagnose what's wrong. And again, we're always here at Extension. We can help you out. So if you call us up or email us, we're happy to walk you through and help you determine what the problem might be. Are the leaves turning yellow or brown or dropping? There's lots of different reasons for that. It could be that the plant went through a dry spell and it's dropping some of the yellow leaves that now that it's perked back up again. It could be that it has a nutrient deficiency. We can help you identify those so that you know what symptoms to look for. Are there signs of disease? Do you have little spots all over the disease? Are there some weird leaves, odd margins, things like that? And should the crops be harvested? Is that pepper too big? Is it big enough? When do you harvest okra? Well, it's preferable if you get it when it's smaller. When it gets bigger, it gets really woody and hard. So there's a lot of things to kind of take into account when you're going to harvest your produce. Um, for instance, peppers. So a lot of people like yellow peppers, red peppers, or orange peppers. They're colorful and they're pretty, but if you pick them early, they're green. If you leave them on the plant for a while, they'll turn color. So that's kind of something that some people don't know. Pumpkins. You want to grow pumpkins? A lot of people shy away from them because they do require some space. But pumpkins are green when they become, they're basically just a gourd, but depending on what size they are, they still have to go through the maturation process and they need sunlight to do that. So if they're not in much sunlight, they'll stay a greeny color, even if that's not their color they're supposed to be. So that orange color takes a while to develop. Some people, I get people, I planted pumpkins and they're coming up green. They're green. What do I do? Just give it some time and some sunlight. And integrated pest management is always your friend. You probably do some of that anyway, but knowing how to identify those pests, knowing how to identify the damage, being able to tell and ask some simple questions to figure out, is it droopy because I didn't water it or because it's overwatered? All of these things fall under the heading of integrated pest management. And all that knowledge of you guys coming here and getting that extra education, that's all going into your IPM toolbox so that you can go back and pop that toolbox open when you're out there in the garden and go, oh yeah, I remember. I need to check and see under this leaf if there are any of those little bronze eggs. And if there are, I'm supposed to squish them because it's way easier to kill them at this stage than it is when they're an adult doing the damage. So that all is valuable knowledge that you can keep. All right, how does IPM work? Hey, I wouldn't be an extension if I didn't plug IPM. So this comes from a presentation by our specialist, Dr. Allison Johnson. She's a fantastic speaker and really breaks this stuff down for in layman's terms, but it's just a balanced approach to managing pests. Like I said, you probably already do it. You just didn't know there was a name for it. So you're going to kind of anticipate and prevent damage. Put your ear to the ground and listen. So and so down the street was already getting some damage. I need to pay attention to that. You're going to think about several different tactics to control, squishing those little bronze eggs, using some insecticidal soap, stuff like that. What that's going to do is that's going to help. Pesticides are okay to use under IPM. You just don't want to use them all the time. They're kind of reserved for when you really can't do anything else. And you're going to kind of try to figure out your goal. What's your goal? IPM can have different goals. One can be prevention. You just want to kind of keep that pest from being a problem. Suppression. Maybe you've been on vacation for 2 weeks and you come back and you're like, oh man, I got to figure out how to knock these guys back. And so it could be suppression or it could be eradication. So if you're a producer and you're growing some stuff for the farmer's market and it is not acceptable to have damage, you may want to try to get rid of all those pests. So you got to figure out what your threshold is and kind of keep to that as a goal. And this is just what that IPM triangle looks like. So you've got your cultural stuff on the bottom, your physical, mechanical stuff, biological, chemical. So the further up the triangle you go, the more risky it's going to be. Cultural is pretty easy, just choosing the right plant for the right place, raking, sanitation, physical, mechanical, insect traps or barriers, continue to weed to get rid of nursery spots for pests, mulching, all of that stuff. So a lot of it is just common sense. Like I said, you probably already do it. This is just kind of a light bulb moment. I do already do it, and that's a good thing. So what else can you do? Harvest that produce frequently. Like any other plant. It's just trying to complete its life cycle. It just wants to grow from a seed and end up seeding. That's what every plant wants to do. Some are annuals, some are perennials. You see two annuals here. You got cucumbers and you got beans. But you never want to leave it on the plant too long. You want to harvest it because that little plant is producing its heart out, trying to produce seed for itself so it can then die and complete its life cycle. You, as that gardener, don't want it to do that quite yet. So you're going to try to pick all of that stuff so that it doesn't stay on the vine because it will start slowing down production if you leave unpicked fruits or vegetables on the vine. So don't let fruit mature on that plant. Make sure you get it off. Watering, you want the roots to get as much water as it needs. That's what's going to get those nutrients from the soil and the water up to the top part of the plant. So make sure that you don't let the soil dry out too badly. You don't want those root hairs to dry because they'll die. Tomatoes are going to develop blossom end rot, which you see there from inconsistent watering. So it's important, especially with tomatoes, that they get a good, consistent water schedule. So if you can, make sure that you're watering fairly frequently with them. And as long as you have good nutrients, micronutrients available, you shouldn't see that. But you can't always get cracking if you get a lot of water from a really heavy rain, like we just had 3 inches of rain. So you might get some cracking of the fruit because it grows so quickly, but try to keep it as consistent as possible. Mulch around those plants so that when it does rain or you water, it keeps that moisture in. And container plants can lose moisture quicker than in ground plants. So you might need to make sure that you're watering more often. And you can use mulch on container plants. Don't be afraid to do that. So pruning tomatoes, remove those lower leaves. That'll help with splashback, which you can get disease that splashes from the soil onto the leaves. Peppers, top that plant when it's mature, and that's going to help it bush out a little bit more instead of growing taller. Asparagus, cut back the ferns in early winter, and you'll get more of those yummy spears that grow up. Nothing better than going out in the garden and snapping a few of those off in early spring and eating them while you're out there. Berry bushes, prune out canes that have fruit, except for the ever-bearing varieties like you see there. Just get the dead stuff out. Get it out. Early spring's a good time to do that before it's too hot. And grapes, mostly muscadines. We don't do a lot of bunch grapes here because they're very susceptible to disease. But if you have muscadines, prune your vines in late winter, not early winter. Don't do it in December. Do it in February. That's going to help prevent bud break early. So if they do, they're not going to get frozen and you won't end up with any grapes. So remember that. You want to prune those guys in early spring. Understanding fertilizers. So NPK, I'm trying to buzz through here. Nitrogen, that's going to be for your greens. Phosphorus, roots, bulbs, tubers. Potassium for fruits. And your fertilizer bag, you'll find all that information on there. This happens to be for a synthetic version, but as I mentioned with organics, they're doing better about that. So you can find all of that on the back. Seeds have all of that stuff in their little seed coat. So once they've germinated, then that's when you go back after they're established and give them some fertilizer. Don't forget with bushes like blueberries, fruit trees, and grapes, they only absorb those nutrients during the growing season. So make sure you give them a boost as they're leafing out and then after fruit production. And then, of course, heavy feeders like tomato, and I mentioned, make sure you're continuously feeding them or giving them a granular time release. pH, I'm going to zoom through this. This is just a kind of an idea of what some plants like lower pH, some like kind of more mild, 6.2 to 6.5. Just kind of a pictorial so you see. And this is, again, you can see availability of those nutrients. Frost protection, always important in late spring. I think we're safe now, but just have it on the ready. And you can use things like cold frames, hoop houses, row covers, that kind of stuff. Trellises, like I mentioned before, really important if you are low on space. You can use a cattle panel, bend that over. You can let your vining stuff go up in that. But there's all sorts of options, free options, cheap options. You don't have to spend much money. Teepees, natural, you can go out and use branches from your yard. You can use some stakes and weave that in between. Pretty easy. So why should you grow your own vegetables? Well, I mean, like I said, horticultural therapy. It's a good way to feel connected to nature. You can save some money and time, and you feel a lot of satisfaction when you're growing your own stuff. It can help you save on your grocery bills. Fresh stuff's expensive, and it's only getting more expensive. So if you do it yourself, that can save you a lot of money. Cut back on wastes. When you grow your own stuff, you only harvest what you need, you only plant what you need, so that minimizes food waste. And you can get rid of the pesticides. The commercial production of most vegetables that you see in the store requires an enormous amount of pesticides to keep it looking good. You can buy organic, and I do encourage you to do so, but it's expensive. Not everybody has that. So you control that if you grow your own food, so you don't have to worry about that as much. You can grow exactly what you want, and you can make eating healthier and easier because you can walk right out there and pick the fresh stuff, and you can swap with your neighbors. So maybe they're growing something else. Try new recipes. You can grow more nutritious food. So a lot of times in the production chain, it can take weeks for food to get to your grocery store. So if you're just going out there and picking that out of your garden and then taking it in, think of all the extra nutrients that are there, and you're nurturing the environment. Everything starts at the soil level, folks. So if you're enhancing that and protecting that soil biome, it'll be well worth your while because everything will be much healthier. So, all right. So that's basically it. I did mention that the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel, we have that. You can see the YouTube, the QR code for that. I put all of my recorded stuff there. You can go check that out. And then the other QR code is for our classes and events page on our UGA page. And we usually list about 3 months worth of stuff there at a time. So you can go check that out. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. You can stick them in the chat box. And I'm also happy to share the slide deck. So you can get my email address here. You can email me, and I'll be happy to share the slide deck with you if you would like it. Because I did kind of zoom through some of that, but let's see. I have termites in my raised bed. Got compost from local location for free. Termites. So the termites are decomposers. They are just part of the ecosystem, and there's no reason why you should want them dead any other than any other bug that's out there. And you probably have a lot more bugs in your raised bed than you think you do. So when you get organic matter, mulch, or anything, and you're mixing that in with the soil, there's a lot of non-decomposed woody material that's still in there. That's what that termite wants. It wants that woody material. So really, there's no reason to kill them. They're not interested in your plants. They're only interested in that cellulose, that woody fiber, that cellulose there, because that's what they eat. And they're going to eat that, and they're going to decompose that, and they're going to turn that into soil. So they're not bad. Leave them be. And really, there's no good way of getting rid of them because they're mixed up in that. The only way to really do that would be to put a pesticide down, and we don't want to do that if we're going to grow food in that. What wattage for grow lights? Good question, and I don't have that off the top of my head. Pretty much though, as long as it says grow lights, it's a bigger issue to have the correct wavelengths and color. So red and blues. You can use fluorescence, you cannot use incandescents, but you can use fluorescence and LEDs. They've got to have those red and blue wavelengths in order to allow the plant to grow. That's what the plant needs. So I'm not sure on the wattage though. That's a good question. I just generally think it's like if it says grow light and I check to make sure it's got red and blue wavelengths, then it's probably okay. Let's see. Are water pots necessary for a community garden plot? Water pots? I'm not, I don't know what you mean there. Um, so once they eat everything, will they go? No, they will not go into your house. The termites will not go into your house. Don't worry about it. There is way more material for them to eat outside than there is for them to eat inside. I will say as an aside, if you are living in Georgia or in the Southeast, you do, in my opinion, should have a termite bond on your house and you should have a barrier on your house because if you don't have termites, it's probably just a matter of time. Almost every single abode will have an infestation of termites at some point if you do not treat for them. But they're going to be out in nature. They are everywhere and they're just decomposers. They're doing their job. So there's other stuff out there that's probably more favorable for them than anything else. I have black film on some gardenias. Do you know what that could be? It's not small spots, it's larger patches. It could be like mildew. Could be like powdery mildew or something like that. I would just encourage you because I hate to tell without looking at a photo. I hate to tell people what it could be if I'm not 100% certain. And the best way to do that is to send me a photo. So if you have questions on what an insect is, if you need ID, if you've got a disease, if something weird's going on and you got some weird growth pattern, you can take a picture of it and you can email it to my email address there, and I'll take a look and tell you what's going on. Okay. Well, if nobody else has any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. But again, this is my email address, lisa.klein@gwinnettcounty.com. I'm happy to answer questions. So you can just send me an email there and you can check out the other offerings at the YouTube channel. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Thank you all for attending. Have a good afternoon.